Gender-swapping Liet Kynes. In Denis Villeneuve's Dune, Part 1, the character of Liet Kynes is portrayed as a black woman, a change from the male version in Frank Herbert's original book. This choice was made to offer greater diversity in the representation of characters. Liet Kynes, an ecologist in the story, plays a crucial role in the Fremen community's relationship with the planet Arrakis. By reimagining Kynes as a woman, the film addresses the lack of prominent female roles in the original novel while maintaining the character's intellectual and ecological importance. This shift has sparked discussions about representation in media, showing how modern adaptations can change characters to reflect broader societal themes like gender and racial diversity. The decision also highlights how the Dune story, while written in the 1960s, can be reinterpreted for a modern audience. Herbert's work focused heavily on politics, ecology, and power, but women in the original novel often functioned in supporting roles. Villeneuve's casting choice disrupts that pattern, giving one of the central scientific and moral voices of the story a female identity. This provides viewers with a visible example of women occupying positions of authority, knowledge, and leadership, which resonates strongly with contemporary conversations about inclusion. Additionally, casting Liet Kynes as a woman of color challenges traditional expectations of who holds institutional and scientific authority in science fiction. The deeper implications of this casting choice extend beyond mere representation. Sharon Duncan Brewster's portrayal of Kynes brings a gravitas and spiritual connection to the role that emphasizes the character's function as a bridge between scientific rationality and indigenous wisdom. Her performance suggests that ecological understanding requires both empirical knowledge and cultural intuition, a perspective that challenges Western scientific traditions that often dismiss indigenous knowledge systems. The film positions Kynes as someone who understands that true environmental stewardship cannot be separated from social justice and cultural respect. Furthermore, the choice to make Kynes a woman of color speaks directly to contemporary environmental justice movements, where women of color often lead grassroots efforts to protect communities from ecological harm. This casting creates an implicit connection between the fictional struggle for Arrakis and real-world environmental battles, where marginalized communities disproportionately bear the costs of ecological destruction while being excluded from decision-making processes. The emphasis on ecology as moral duty. Frank Herbert's Dune has long highlighted the significance of ecology, but Denis Villeneuve's films take this theme further by making it a pressing moral obligation. The desert environment of Arrakis, while always central to the story, becomes more than just a setting in the film. It represents the planet's vulnerability to exploitation and environmental collapse. Villeneuve's version amplifies the urgency of this issue, drawing clear parallels to contemporary concerns about climate change and ecological degradation. The Fremen, who live on Arrakis, embody a deep connection to their land, envisioning a future where ecological balance is restored and resources are conserved. In Dune, Part 1, the film shows their efforts to harness the planet's harsh landscape without destroying it, underlining the importance of responsible stewardship. The film also stresses the dangers of unchecked industrialization and resource extraction, framing these issues as interconnected with the Fremen's struggle for survival. This strong environmental narrative reflects today's climate crises and critiques the environmental damage caused by corporate greed and imperialistic forces. Villeneuve's visual language reinforces these ecological themes through striking cinematography that treats the desert as a living entity. The sandworms are presented not merely as monsters to be conquered, but as integral parts of Arrakis's ecosystem, creatures whose life cycles are essential to spice production and planetary health. This portrayal challenges anthropocentric worldviews that place human interests above ecological balance. The film suggests that true power comes from working with natural systems rather than dominating them, a message that resonates strongly with contemporary discussions about sustainable development and regenerative agriculture. The economic critique embedded in these ecological themes becomes even more pointed when considering how spice functions as a metaphor for fossil fuels. The entire galactic economy depends on this single resource, creating vulnerability, conflict, and environmental degradation, much like our contemporary dependence on oil and gas. The film's portrayal of corporate houses fighting over spice extraction rights mirrors real-world conflicts over natural resources, suggesting that ecological destruction and imperial violence are fundamentally connected phenomena. Jessica as a fierce maternal warrior. In Frank Herbert's novel, Lady Jessica is portrayed as intelligent, disciplined, and influential within the Bene Gesserit order, but she often operates through restraint and subtle political maneuvering. Denis Villeneuve's adaptation expands this role by presenting Jessica as both a strategist and an active fighter. In Dune Part 1, she is shown physically engaging in combat against the Sardaukar, the Emperor's elite soldiers. This is a departure from the book, where her power is usually conveyed through intellect, persuasion, and her mastery of the Bene Gesserit voice. The film reframes Jessica as a figure of maternal strength, protective of Paul, but also unafraid to assert dominance in violent or dangerous circumstances. This emphasis reshapes her character into a more direct challenge to patriarchal structures within the story. Instead of working quietly within a male-dominated power system, Jessica pushes back openly, showing not only her loyalty as a mother, but also her agency as a warrior and leader. The choice to highlight her physical and emotional strength positions her as a symbol of maternal empowerment. By giving Jessica greater presence on the battlefield and within the Bene Gesserit hierarchy, the film presents her as a force capable of shaping political and cultural outcomes rather than being limited to the background. Rebecca Ferguson's portrayal of Jessica also challenges traditional notions of motherhood by presenting a woman who refuses to choose between maternal care and personal power. Her character demonstrates that protective instincts can coexist with strategic thinking and physical capability. This representation counters cultural narratives that often force women to sacrifice professional ambitions or personal agency when they become mothers. Jessica's evolution throughout the film shows her growing into her full potential as both a Bene Gesserit adept and a mother, suggesting that these roles can be mutually reinforcing rather than contradictory. The film's emphasis on Jessica's mystical pregnancy in Part 2 further develops themes of bodily autonomy and female agency. Her ability to access genetic memories and communicate with her unborn daughter Liet challenges patriarchal control over women's reproductive experiences. The narrative suggests that women possess forms of knowledge and connection that transcend male-dominated institutional structures, positioning female intuition and biological experience as sources of genuine power rather than weakness. Paul as a chosen one, who questions destiny. In many traditional hero stories, the chosen one accepts their role as a savior without hesitation. Frank Herbert's Dune complicates this idea, and Denis Villeneuve's films expand on that tension. Paul Atreides is still treated as a messianic figure by the Fremen, but instead of embracing the role as destiny, he shows unease and resistance. In Dune Part 1 and especially Part 2, Paul voices doubt about the religious and political expectations placed on him. This change highlights the dangers of blind faith and draws attention to the way myths can be manufactured and exploited. Rather than presenting Paul as a straightforward white savior who liberates the oppressed Fremen, Villeneuve positions him as someone trapped in a system of prophecy and manipulation. The Bene Gesserit have planted legends among the Fremen for generations, and Paul recognizes he is stepping into a role shaped by outside control. His reluctance questions the morality of assuming power over an indigenous people, even if it brings temporary victory. This portrayal reflects modern critiques of colonialist narratives, where a foreign leader is glorified for saving a native population. By showing Paul's discomfort, the film warns against romanticizing savior figures and underscores the cost of manufactured destiny. Timothée Chalamet's performance captures the psychological toll of Paul's position with remarkable nuance. His portrayal emphasizes the character's youth and vulnerability, challenging traditional masculine archetypes of the reluctant hero. Paul's visions of potential futures, including scenes of galactic jihad fought in his name, create genuine horror rather than excitement about his growing power. This approach critiques power fantasies common in science fiction and fantasy, suggesting that true leadership requires grappling with the unintended consequences of one's actions rather than simply accepting destiny. The film's treatment of Paul's prescient abilities also functions as a metaphor for privilege and the responsibility that comes with advantages. His visions represent forms of knowledge and foresight that others lack, paralleling how social privilege provides certain individuals with insights and opportunities unavailable to others. Paul's struggle with how to use these abilities ethically reflects contemporary discussions about how privileged individuals should leverage their advantages for social good without perpetuating systems of inequality. Chani as political conscience. In Frank Herbert's novel, Chani primarily serves as Paul's partner and supporter, with her perspective often framed through his story. Denis Villeneuve alters this dynamic by making Chani an independent voice of resistance and moral critique. In Dune, Part 2, she is no longer just a romantic counterpart, but acts as Paul's conscience, questioning both prophecy and the manipulation behind it. She challenges the idea that Paul should accept a messianic role simply because it benefits the Fremen's cause, highlighting the risks of placing blind faith in religious or political figures. Chani also serves as a feminist counterbalance to Paul's rise. While others around him celebrate prophecy as destiny, she identifies it as a tool of control and warns about the potential for tyranny. Her resistance prevents Paul's story from becoming a one-dimensional savior narrative and instead reframes it as a struggle between individual choice and systemic manipulation. By voicing doubt, insisting on ethical considerations, and pushing back against Paul's acceptance of power, Chani draws attention to the costs of turning political struggles into myths. Her presence ensures that the story is not just about leadership and conquest, but also about accountability, ethical responsibility, and the dangers of unquestioned authority. Zendaya's portrayal of Chani brings a modern sensibility to questions of political resistance and personal agency. Her character represents a younger generation's skepticism toward traditional power structures and inherited authority. Chani's questioning of prophecy reflects contemporary movements that challenge established narratives and demand evidence-based decision-making rather than faith-based acceptance of leadership claims. Her insistence on practical results over mystical promises aligns with grassroots activism that prioritizes material improvements in people's lives over symbolic victories. The Fremen as anti-colonial voices. In Villeneuve's Dune films, the Fremen are depicted not just as desert warriors, but as a people resisting exploitation and oppression. In Frank Herbert's novel, their struggle primarily revolves around survival and control of Arrakis's spice, but the films expand this into a broader narrative of anti-colonial resistance. Their battle against external powers, such as the Harkonnens and the Emperor, is framed in a way that mirrors real-world indigenous and colonized populations resisting imperial and corporate exploitation. The Fremen are shown as a cohesive community with traditions, knowledge, and spiritual practices tied directly to their land. The Fremen's connection to Arrakis is both practical and cultural. They understand the desert not just as a resource to be harvested, but as a living ecosystem that requires careful stewardship. Water conservation, environmental rituals, and survival strategies demonstrate that their fight is fundamentally about protecting their autonomy and preserving their environment. Villeneuve's films draw explicit parallels between the Fremen's struggle and modern issues of land rights, indigenous sovereignty, and resistance to resource extraction. Control over spice becomes a metaphor for control over natural wealth, showing the intersection of colonialism, corporate exploitation, and ecological destruction. By emphasizing their political, ethical, and ecological stakes, the films position the Fremen as active agents of change, not passive victims, highlighting themes of resistance, self-determination, and the enduring impact of imperialism on marginalized populations. The voice as power against oppression. In Villeneuve's Dune films, the Bene Gesserit voice is portrayed as more than a tool for persuasion. It becomes a metaphor for resistance against oppressive systems. In Frank Herbert's novels, the voice allows its user to compel obedience through precise control of tone, pitch, and word choice. Villeneuve emphasizes its role as a form of empowerment, particularly for women, showing how trained individuals can leverage their knowledge and skills to challenge hierarchical structures. The film frames it as a disciplined, almost ritualistic practice, demonstrating that mastery requires intelligence, patience, and careful observation. Jessica teaches Paul the voice not merely as a survival tactic, but as a method of exerting influence in a world where overt power is often denied to marginalized groups. The technique requires understanding human psychology and manipulating vocal resonance to override resistance in listeners. Villeneuve shows several examples where subtle vocal commands can halt aggression or compel cooperation, emphasizing its effectiveness as a non-violent form of power. By framing it as a skill passed from mother to son, the film highlights the importance of transmitting knowledge that enables agency and resistance. The voice becomes both a literal and symbolic weapon, demonstrating that intelligence, training, and self-control can counter brute force and oppressive authority. This reinterpretation underscores themes of empowerment, agency, and the strategic use of subtle power in environments dominated by patriarchal and colonial hierarchies. The film suggests that true power lies not only in physical strength or political position, but in knowledge, discipline, and the ability to influence outcomes without resorting to violence. Chani walking away from Paul, Part 2. At the end of Dune, Part 2, Chani makes a decisive break from Paul, refusing to remain a submissive partner in his rise to power. In Frank Herbert's book, Chani's role is largely supportive, focused on love and alliance with Paul. with little narrative autonomy. Villeneuve changes this by granting her full agency. She chooses to leave and ride off alone rather than conform to the expectations of prophecy or Paul's political assent. This act emphasizes Chani's independence and challenges patriarchal norms within the story. Her departure is a visible rejection of the idea that women must serve as passive supporters of male power, even when that power is framed as destiny. By defying prophecy and refusing to be instrumentalized in Paul's rise, Chani asserts moral and personal authority, showing that individual choice can override social and religious pressures. The scene reframes the narrative to highlight autonomy, resistance, and the possibility of alternative paths beyond predetermined roles. It also reinforces a broader feminist critique, demonstrating that agency, ethical judgment, and self-determination are central to her character, contrasting sharply with her traditional depiction in the novels.